put a pause on the record.
Partners with Aspire Consulting. We've got Randy Stone, who's going to be doing the walkthrough of PeopleSoft workflow. Randy is one of our technical consultants. He's got 14 plus years of experience with PeopleSoft. He's very knowledgeable in a variety of areas, but workflow is one of his strong suits. Little background about Aspire. We are a St. Louis-based consulting firm. We do consulting on PeopleSoft, Oracle Cloud, Workday, Taleo. All of our resources are based in the U.S., and most of our consultants have an average experience level of 15 plus years that we would deliver to any project. Hopefully you guys get something out of the webinar. I think it's great. Randy's done a really good job pulling it together. We also do demos for other portions of PeopleSoft and whatnot. So if there's other modules or functionality that you or your organizations are interested in, please feel free to reach out to us and we can schedule some time to understand what you're looking for and maybe we can put something together for you. So without further ado, go ahead, Randy.
Okay. All right, let me get the screen share up here. Make sure that's all working. All right. So thanks for everybody for joining. I know it's Friday afternoon. Everybody probably wants to get their weekend started, and this is a bit of a dense topic for Friday afternoon, but hopefully we can, you guys can learn something. Going to be going through kind of webinar over pretty much workflow end to end. Also up front, I've been told that I speak a little fast, so if I'm getting ahead of myself and you need me to slow down, just say so in the chat. If you have any questions, you can throw them in the chat as well, and Charlie will try to bring them up. I would probably say hold your questions till near the end, though. Workflow is very kind of all tied together. So if you're seeing something and you're thinking about something, we're probably going to get to it. We're just not getting to it in the order you might expect. Most of these type of demos, we would have a very strict kind of agenda, and I don't really have that here just because of how it all ties together. As we start to go through the configuration, you're going to see kind of how it's all kind of spread around, which I think is the reason that workflow tends to be confusing to a lot of people. It's an area where a lot of people shy away. They don't really know what it can do. They find it confusing, or so we're going to kind of go through those things and hopefully clarify some of the functionalities of what it can and can't do. I think that's something I see a lot with clients, is that one of the first questions I get is, hey, we have this idea, but we have no clue if this stuff's even possible. So hopefully we can clarify that. I'll try to keep it functional. Near the end, we will get into some technical stuff, and there might be some code on the screen and that kind of thing, but we'll try to keep it functional, try to keep it to what kind of a configuration person can do. And I will point out the places you do need a developer to kind of step in. Because that's always another question I get is, what do we, how much of this can we do with a functional resource or something like that? How much do we, need developers to do so? And it is kind of a little mix of both. So, all right, so getting started, moving to an agenda. Again, I do have an agenda. We will probably be off this agenda in the first 5 minutes because this stuff is all kind of intertwined. I'm going to go through a quick overview of workflow and what it is. Then we're going to go through the configuration. This is where we're going to spend the majority of our time probably. I'm going to go through the 4 major configuration screens you need to use to set up a workflow or tweak a workflow, and all the different things that are in there that you can use. And I think we'll spend the most of our time kind of looking at that, and then we'll be looking at it within the environment as well and kind of showing what that configuration changes are doing to the workflow in the PeopleSoft environment. So again, I have some slides here, but I'm going to stay most of the time in the environment. The slides are more just to kind of keep me on some sort of agenda. Then we're going to go over the monitor approvals, which is more your administrative side. So what your admins can do within workflow and what they, what that tool set allows them to do and how important that value is. We'll talk notifications a bit. I don't have any notifications turned on in the environment just because it's a demo environment. So I'm not going to show an email going out. I'm just going to talk about kind of where you set those up, how they look, and how they work. We'll talk about threads and ad hocs. This is where we get into a little more customization type stuff, a little less out of the box, timeouts and escalations, as well as the NEM, which is the notification and escalation manager. Then we'll talk about the user approvals, the routes to the requester, filter requester, and then like I said, that last slide is really advanced customization, where we're going to go over what can you really do with workflow if you've got a developer going in the back end and really doing some heavier customization. And then again, I will have Q&A at the end if there's any questions. Like I said, I've I would recommend you probably hold them because, again, we'll probably get to what you're thinking at some point, but feel free to speak up if you want something. There are some parts of this I will glance over as well. If I move something too quickly through something that you want more information on, feel free to reach out to us after this, and we will, get more information on that. So there will be some, there's a lot to workflow, and I'm trying to get to the key parts. So if I skip something that you really want more information on, just feel free to reach out, and we'll get you more information. So overview, what is workflow? So first off, a little definition. You're going to see AWE all over this presentation. That stands for the Approval Workflow Engine, which is what Oracle PeopleSoft calls the little engine in the back end that does the workflow. And this is just a screenshot. This is workflow. When you see this on a page, we're talking workflow. And if you've been in PeopleSoft for any period of time, you've probably seen this somewhere. Somebody submitted a request, and you've got these approval stages and paths and request IDs. And so pretty much everybody that's been in PeopleSoft for a while has seen this, and that's kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about workflow. It's the engine behind the scenes that generates these paths and runs a transaction through approval. And that transaction can really be anything. You can do completely ground up custom workflow stuff. If your organization has manual processes today that you're doing with email approvals or PDFs being signed and scanned, and you want to bring that into PeopleSoft, the workflow engine is really great for that. But it's also embedded heavily throughout the delivered systems, especially in the areas of APPO type stuff. Again, you're not usually handling a lot of approvals when you're bringing money in, but when you're sending money out, you're usually going to have different approval levels and different people that have to approve things when you're purchasing. So you see it a lot in there. See some in GL, a little bit in AR, but it's pretty spread out, primarily through finance. You don't see it a whole lot in HR, but all right. So a little heads up as we go into this. This is a little tutorial, this link. I highly recommend if you're from a developer perspective, if you want to know about how to build one of these. What I didn't want to have to do is enter a voucher every time I want to show something. So I built a custom little simple AWE page. You'll see in just a second. And just as a full disclaimer, I use this tutorial online all the time. It's a great reference. And so I kind of built it. I tweaked it a bit, but built it off that. So this isn't just me winging it myself. I kind of just want to be upfront that I use this as kind of an example to build a really basic one. That way I'm not having to go through a voucher entry or something like that to get to an approval. So should make things a little smoother. All right, let's talk configuration. So again, not a whole lot of information on the slides. I'm gonna more try to bring it out. And again, we are recording this, and you can get a copy of it from us later. So most of what we're gonna go through is gonna be me speaking more than stuff on the slides. But just some basic places here where all these links are. These are the 5 and primarily 4 spots you configure. And again, delivered we'll have out here as well as any kind of custom ones you build. So if you're building a custom AWE page component, you're going to need to set all these up for the first time. But for delivered, this stuff's going to be already kind of out there. You're going to probably just want to tweak it so you can change how your workflow goes, because every organization is going to handle their approval setups differently. So, and this is where I think workflow starts to scare people, because they're like, I don't know what a transaction registry is, or a configuration, or an approval process setup. And so these pages can be a little confusing. PeopleBooks is also not very good at this stuff. They tend to glance over a lot of stuff. So these pages can be kind of confusing too. So I'm just hoping what we gain out of this is that you guys have a better understanding going forward of what's on all these pages and what it really does. So at this point, I'm going to jump over to the environment. And kind of, first off, let's just show kind of what we're talking about when I say that I built a simple AWE. We have a demo here and just a basic header demo. So all this allows us to do is enter a quick transaction. This transaction has one value only, and it's the amount field. And then you can save that transaction or submit that transaction for approval. And so once we submit it, you'll see workflow will kick in. And what I've done is built a basic single approver, simple workflow. So just as an example here, we'll give it a value of 100 and hit submit, and we're going to see here comes workflow. So the workflow engine, every time we create one of these transactions, is going to go down the paths and setup, and we'll kind of walk through how to set those up, how to make those more complicated, how to do things like parallel approvals, multi-stage approvals, dynamic approvals when we get to the configuration. But we'll be in this page a lot, kind of coming in here, hitting submit, and seeing how the changes we make interact. So for a starter, I've got a real simple one here. This has one stage, one path, and we'll talk about stages and paths in a minute. And currently it's pending for multiple approvers. And if I click that, it'll tell me the 2 test approvers I have set up. So that's where we're going to start from, and we'll tweak this as we go. So now I'm going to jump into the configuration to see how this happens behind the scenes. So all of this is under Enterprise Components, approvals. And we are going to start with registry. It kind of puts these in the order in which you kind of, again, to set these up, you kind of bounce around a lot, but registry is usually where we start. And again, everything's custom. I just put ZZ in front of all the custom objects. So we should have a custom demo here. And again, you could come in here and hit search and you're going to see all the delivered stuff. So if you're talking about your AR maintenance write-off approvals, delivered out of the box right here, asset cost transfers is here, your PO stuff is going to be here, your GL journal approval. So all the delivered ones are going to be here, and that's where within your organization, if you're not building something custom, you're going to come out here and say, oh, no, we're going to tweak our purchase order setup. But for this one, I've built a simple one to kind of get into the details a bit more. So, all right, so we're on the register transactions. I don't know why they call it register transactions. It's just a basic, this is like the top level configuration within workflow. I'm going to go ahead and expand all these things, and we're going to talk about them. And this is, again, where we're going to start bouncing around between topics because everything's kind of intertwined here. But hopefully it's helpful. So the very first thing you define for this is always this little technically your cross-reference table. So PeopleSoft has a bunch of the delivered engine, and then you're going to have your custom or in delivered sense, your transactional tables. So your PO header, right? You've got your PO header. Well, something has to tie your PO header to the behind the scenes AWE tables, and that's your cross-reference table. So that's just going to have a bunch of keys on it. Those keys are your transactional keys as well as your the back-end AWE table. So again, from a technical perspective, it's important, not something you would ever change from a functional perspective. It's going to be pretty standard. Then again, we have work list prefix. So there are 3 ways we can notify, as we see on the next step here is email, work list, and push notifications. So with work list, if you've been familiarized with work list in PeopleSoft, it adds it to your list of to-dos in the work list. And this is just a prefix that it puts them in there so you can sort them correctly. And again, now we're bouncing around because now we're going to notifications kind of randomly here, and there's more notifications on other pages, but this is where you turn on at the highest level what notifications you even want to allow. So 3 types of notifications we have are email, work list, and push. So email, again, is just sending an email out when the events occur. Work list is just putting it in your work list, and push is for mobile notifications to your phone. Most organizations I've seen don't use push notifications or even have it configured, but it is an option. Clicking each of these will also bring up some other stuff. So again, bouncing around here because notification strategy was on a later slide, but just to kind of go through strategy, you have 2 options here when you talk about email notifications, and that is online, what it calls online and offline processing. Online processing means those notifications that you configure, again, on a later page are going to go out immediately. Offline means they're going to wait until you run the notification manager. So if you want to bulk send your notifications at 8 p.m. at night, you can do that just so people aren't getting cluttered with emails during the day. And of course, from a customization perspective, you can do custom notifications that do even more complicated things. But for a basic setup, you're either going to, again, go with offline or offline. Most organizations are going to use online because you want that notification going out. And the notifications we're talking about primarily to the approver saying, hey, this transaction's been submitted for your approval. Go do some action on it so we can move it forward. So just kind of a note there of, people always ask, can it send them out immediately? Can it send them out later? It can do both right here. Use email approvals. Again, not very commonly used, but it is an option. You can do email approvals where they can simply reply to an email, and that reply is, can be treated as an approval or denial based on what they put in it. So most organizations don't use this. They make you go into PeopleSoft and click the buttons. That way you're reviewing the full transaction, but this is an option here. Going to kind of skip over form generator, packaging class. Anytime we see packaging class, we're talking about people code. We're talking about highly customized stuff here. And this just kind of allows you to really customize the look of the notification that's going out way beyond like just what the email says. So, and this is, I think, more for the email approvals, kind of building that form that goes out to the users. So again, highly custom there. Going to just kind of glance over it. Not something you're going to use from a functional perspective very often. Not much going on here with work lists. You just turn it on, and then push notifications, same thing. You just turn it on at the high level. And again, just turning those on isn't going to do anything. It's just going to enable them at the highest level. It's not actually creating these notifications. We'll see later where we do that. Notifications include URLs to get the users to these locations where they need to make their approvals or denials or whatever. So you can have some custom stuff here in case you have different bases, portals, or nodes, but it's going to use out of the box the default stuff. So as long as you're coming from the environment you want to go to, you don't really need to enter this stuff, rarely ever. Same thing here with URL appending parameters. If you're taking them to a really custom page and you want to append some stuff, again, highly technical and not something most organizations need to use to do basic approvals. Default approval component is important though. You have to enter this. So this is telling it where are we approving, what's the menu and what's the component. And again, I've built this custom component, which is the one we looked at through the navigation a minute ago. So this just tells the system where it should direct the users to go do their approvals. We have event class handler. We'll talk about that later. That's a little more on the customization side. And then we have approval status manager. Same thing here. We're looking at packages and classes. So we're talking about app package code. Again, we'll talk about that later when we get into more of the customization stuff. Then we set up our transaction at the level, and this is already going to be set up for any of the delivered ones. You can do approvals at a header or a line level within workflow. That's a question I commonly get is if our transaction has 12 lines and we want to deny one and approve the other 11, can we do that? And you can. It gets a little uglier than just doing the whole transaction end to end, but you can set it up so that certain fields, or certain lines can be denied while the rest of them still go through and process, and the whole transaction is considered approved even if parts of them are denied. But this is just basically saying what level do you want to do it at, what's your main header table you're driving off of, and then what's your keys that you're going to use. So in this case, I've built a custom little header table, and it has that request ID on there, and it has that amount value we saw on the page. So really simple here, just to kind of get the job done. Again, very rarely ever see anyone use line level, but it is possible. From a strategy perspective, typically I see clients use header level, and if they don't like one of the 12 lines, they deny the entire transaction. They make the user change the line they don't like, and they submit it through for approval again, rather than just letting one line get denied. But there are some places where delivered PeopleSoft does use line level. All right, I know that's a lot, and I know it sounds confusing at this point, but trust me, this will all start to tie in together when we kind of come full circle here. Moving on to configuration, again, why they call that registry in this configuration, I don't know. This is just more configuration. We have some ad hoc stuff here at the top. So when we talk about ad hoc, we're talking about the ability to add or remove approvers on the fly. So if I'm an approver and I look at a transaction, I say, well, I kind of need I need somebody else to come in. I need Joe to approve this. I don't feel comfortable just doing it myself. We have that ability to kind of turn that on so that they can add an approver and say, hey, I want someone else to approve this transaction as well as me. And, so this is high level setup for that. This does not, by the way, turn it on, interestingly enough, and I'll explain when we get to that part on how you turn it on. But this is a couple things here. I don't know why this is in ad hoc. This is the approval user info view. This is the data view that tells you about your users. And I'm going to go ahead and jump over and show you what I mean by what this view does. It'll be header. So we're going to go back to the transaction we run earlier, and you saw when I clicked this, right, I get some information. I get a name and a description. It's pulling these values from this view you configure here. This is the delivered one that most of the delivered functionality is going to use. But if your organization was like, hey, when I click this, I'd like to see their title, or I'd like to see, some more information about the user, the employee ID or something, you can customize this view and put a new view in there that has that information, and it will be pulled up in that user info. Why it's under ad hoc, I don't know. It has nothing to do with ad hoc, but that's where they stuck it. And then you have your ad hoc user list. So again, same concept here. You provide a user list, which we haven't gotten to yet, because again, this will all tie around. But this is the list of users that can be added in that ad hoc scenario where they want to add on the fly users. So you got to kind of customize this list to who you want to. Now, if you don't provide this, which I haven't here, then the ad hoc list is everyone in the system. You can literally assign anybody to be an ad hoc approver. But if you wanted to whittle that down and say, only Only managers can do ad hoc approvals. You can provide a list here that filters that. Going to skip over user utilities. There's all kinds of customization here. Again, we're talking code. There's all kinds of customizations you can do around users and how the lists are developed and how they look. Going to just kind of glance over that. Now to events. So this is where we're finally getting to some of the meat here of this thing. So there's a number of different events we'll see from the drop down that can be configured. And this is something you might want to do, from a functional perspective in an organization. You've got some event that's occurring and it's not triggering a notification or an email or something and you want it to. You can come in here and configure and add additional ones. There are a lot of these. So everything you can do within workflow is in here. I mean, ad hoc and putting an ad hoc user. And so let's say your manager adds another manager to the approval list and you want the director to get an email letting him know that that occurred, or you want the requester to get an email letting them know that occurred. So, I mean, you can do all that stuff anytime a transaction is canceled or goes into error or is the final approval or gets denied or launches, you can put stuff in here. Out of the box, you're gonna have usually a minimum of 4 of these. One is the final approval. One is the final denial. So transaction gets denied, transaction gets approved. And when it's final, I mean, it gets approved by all approvers at the very end of the stream. And then you have your launch. So when your process gets kicked off for the first time, or when I hit that submit button over here, that's what's occurring. And then anytime you're routing for approval, because again, that's where you're routing it to a new person down the line and you're gonna want to send notifications. Again, I have no notifications set up here, you'll notice, but this is where you would come in and say, who do you want to send the notification to? Which of the types that you've turned on do you want to send? And then when you start turning those on, you start providing things like the email template, how it would look. Go to template details, you can put in more information. You have your push notification details here, what you want to send out, what you want the message to look like that's going to go to their phone. And then you have a frequency of how often they're going to get this notification and how many times. So that's another thing that tends to come up in workflow is we have some approvers that don't seem to get in there and approve like they're supposed to. How can we bug them regularly? So this is where you would set up and say, hey, he's going to get this every number of hours till he approves it for a max number of times. So you can kind of get that on and get kind of aggressive with your notification strategy if it comes down to that. And again, you can set these notifications up on any event. On top of that, these events also have a second thing that occurs by turning these events on here. You fire code in the back end for these events. And again, when I get to really customizing the later part, I will show that. But yeah, you can get really aggressive with customization around. So if you want the code to fire, you want your developer to do something slick every time one of these events occurs, you want to get that event set up in here. Otherwise, the system won't kick it off. All right, through that. Now, we'll get to the really good stuff. Approval process setup. So your approval process is really the real workflow. I'm going to open the one I have for right now. So this says when that is submitted, when you hit a submit button, what happens? And this is where most people want to make changes. Most organizations want to change this because this is what you really want to occur. And this is typically thought to be a very heavily developer necessary step, and it's really not. It really is configuration, and your functional people can come out here and set this stuff up to work correctly. So, so when I hit submit on a transaction, back here, and I'm adding a new one, and I'm hitting that submit button, it's got a number of determinations to make to pick an approval process. So currently have a single process ID here. This is the only one I have. So out of this setup, it's going to kick this one off because it's the only one. I can also trigger it as the default one, in which case it will always lean toward that one. But it is possible to make many of these. So if you want, say in our example, if the amount is over $200, you want it to go down this crazy approval train. If the amount is under $200, you want it to just be one approver, stuff like that, where you've got a whole different set of paths that you're going down. You can set up multiple of these and put criteria on there. So before we go into setting one of these up or adding to this one that I've got a slide. I'm gonna go back to the slide and talk a little bit about, there we go. Stages, paths, and steps. So this can get confusing to some people too. This is right out of PeopleBooks, this little screen. I like it because it explains clearly. It's weird to me that they do this vertically, these steps vertically, because when you do them in PeopleSoft, they're horizontally, but that's how they did it. So your stages, are sequential. That's the important part to remember. Stages will always fire one after the other. Within a stage, you have paths. Paths run in parallel. So you'll see we have path 1, path 2. As many paths as you make, they will kick off at the same time and they will run in parallel till the end of the stage. Inside the path, you have steps. So you have step 1, step 2 here. There's just a single step here. There's 2 steps here. Steps are sequential. So that's the thing to remember. Stages are sequential, paths are parallel, steps are sequential. So as you start to, usually from a functional requirements perspective, you're going to have some cool flow chart somebody put together for requirements, and you're going to have to turn that into what you got in your configuration. And sometimes you got to kind of coax that to get it right, because you can't run stages in parallel and you can't run steps in parallel. So you have to work the pathing in to get your parallel stuff. So that's the first thing we're going to do here. I'm going to add a couple. I'm going to make our process 2 stages and have some multiple paths so you can kind of see parallelization occurring here and kind of what it can do. So going back to the environment, this is the one we have. I'm going to have to go into cart history mode because it's going to require that. Actually, I'm not even going to do that. I'm going to add a new effective date. So I'm just going to make a new effective date change so that we're in fresh mode. Okay. So interestingly enough there, it didn't copy over the old one, but that's fine. So from the top here, let's go through these kind of quickly. Your admin role, again, admin role, very important here. The admin is what, obviously you have your admin, you kind of have 2 admins in workflow. There's the admin that can get to the monitor approvals page, which I'll show you later. And then there's this admin. This admin role is what workflow does when it can't figure out what to do. If it can't find the users it's looking for, if it can't find an approver because your configuration is wrong or no one has the right role, it will kick it to the admin. So it's very important to define this, have someone assigned to this, and they know that's them, because this will occur. If you make this some random person that's never available, then you're going to have stuff get stuck. I'm going to make this the portal administrator just for testing. Normally you would set up your own role and then assign a certain set of people to this kind of activity. Status active, priority 1. I'm going to make this the default process definition. Again, this is the only process definition. We will talk about these later, so ignore those. Now, we've got stages. Again, what I said I want to do is set this up so that stage 1 is going to be a supervisor and a manager approving in parallel. So they can approve in whatever order they want. They both will have to approve it. And then it's going to kick to stage 2, where I'll have what I'm calling a director. The director will then come in and make the final approval. So just for visibility's sake, I'm going to call these stage 1. Usually from a visibility, you want something like that makes more sense. You would say like manager stage or whatever. I'm just going to say stage 1, just so when you see it on the screen, you'll understand where it's coming from. I'm going to say path 1 here, so you'll see where that's coming from. We will talk about dynamic later. For now, we're going to use static. And so, like I said earlier, we already had this set up so that we had kind of our supervisor level, and we have our supervisor user list. And again, I'll get into user lists in a minute as well. And then it's important when you build these things to get your criteria set. People often forget this criteria. So the criteria is, what is the scenario in which this is going to actually fire and execute as part of the approval chain? And if you go out here, it always defaults to user entered. I don't know why that is, because this won't work. Yeah, you have to set it to always true unless you put criteria in here. So examples of criteria is, again, if we wanted to skip this path anytime the value was over $1,000 or something like that, we can do that. And we'll show that example in a minute. But for now, I'm just going to go to always true. So it's basically saying I always want this path to fire. I have to do this at step level 2. I have to go into step and say, I always want this step to fire. All right, now I'm going to take a second path just to show how that kind of works in parallel. So I'm going to add one more path. I'll call this path 2. Static again, and I'm going to call this the manager level, because we said managers and supervisors we're going to fire off in parallel. Managers, and again, criteria, got to go to always true unless I'm going to put some code in, or put some parameters in there. And if you leave the parameters blank here and you leave it as user entered, it will not fire, and it will confuse you for hours while you try to figure out why it won't fire. All right, next up, another stage. Going to down here on this plus, click one more stage. So again, stage 2. This is going to be path 1 in stage 2, so I'm just going to call it path 1 of 2. And this is going to be our director level. And once again, we got to get our criteria set. We're going to come in and play with criteria in a minute, but for now, let's just say always true. All right, now we've made a save to that. Let's get back in our over here in our transaction, right? So we saw that before. I submitted one, it went to the one person. Now we've changed it to be a little more complicated. So again, it doesn't matter what our amount is yet. Going to hit submit. There we go. Okay, so a couple things occurred here. So just like we built it, you'll see whatever I put in that stage description showed up here. So if I'd put something that makes more sense to the users, it would make more sense. But I just call them stage 1 and 2, path 1, path 2, path 1, 2. But that's where those descriptions end up when it builds this thing. And again, like I said, it doesn't do this vertically weirdly. It does the stages vertically, but these paths actually flow left to right. If I put another user after this one, it'd be right here. And we can show that in a minute as well. It selected multiple approvers here. And then down here, we have an interesting scenario. It didn't find anybody with the director role, and I did that on purpose. So what it did is skip that, and it has now routed to the admins. As I said, these are the people that are set up in our system as a portal administrator. So it kicked over to an admin. So this is where if you don't define your admins right and one of your user groups is missing a person or it can't find someone, it's going to kick it to an approver, and you got to have somebody, that approver can come in here and now do things on behalf of that person. So also, if I show these comments down here, I got to save it first and come back in. I don't know why that is. It's something PeopleSoft needs to fix, but if I show these comments, it's going to tell me, no, it's not going to open. It would say in the comments if it was open for whatever reason that that it did that. It'll say, hey, couldn't find a user, kicked it to admin. So now we're just going to kind of show how this would behave if I'm the approver. So these are in pending and they're in a path that are parallel, so they're both active. So you'll see it's both of these have the little clock, meaning they are pretty much on the clock. It's their turn to do something. This stage is pending, so this stage is active and rolling. This is awaiting further approval. So this stage doesn't kick off to here. Another question I regularly get on this is, what happens if the people in the list down here change? Well, this is really, the pending step is already committed. Everybody who's been selected here is committed. Everybody down here, this is the system's best guess at who the approvers are going to be. Obviously, those people could change before we get there, in which case it will pull up different people. So if your director list were to change, it's not going to say, well, I routed it 2 months ago to the old director. It's going to go find who the new people are. So it's something to keep in mind, is that this is kind of a future state of how it would look right now, but this can change as it moves through. This stuff can never change here. These have already been routed. These are the approvers. Even if these guys get terminated tomorrow, they're still on the hook for this approval, and your admin can step in and fix that if they're gone. So just quickly here, I'm going to come in as Brad and do an approval and show how that would work. And again, normally you'd be doing this on a PO page or something. It wouldn't be this simple demo, but this just keeps it quick and easy for me to demonstrate. I'm going to grab the last one. And you'll see now I've got these buttons enabled so I can do my approval. So I'm going to go ahead and approve for Brad. And you're going to see now it's assigned Brad. It's assigned date and time, which is nice. You now have audit tracking here. You have, again, if you have manual processes that you're doing in a clunky way in your organization today, get it in PeopleSoft with workflow, and you'll have, trackability of everything that happened and when it happened. Much better paperwork on keeping track of the back end. And you'll see it's still pending on path 2. So again, these were in parallel. I could have logged in as one of these guys and done it at first. Instead of Brad, I could have been one of these guys. So either order here could have gone at this point. And you'll see we're still pending up here. Really quickly, I am going to go ahead and just make sure we get a director. So I'm going to pick any user out here that I haven't messed with yet. We'll do Barbara. Give her a role here, and again, ignore kind of where the roles are coming from at this point because we haven't talked user lists yet. I'm just going to say I'm going to make her director, and now sign back in as me, and we're going to do this again, and I'll show you the difference. This time it's going to find my director, and again, we'll talk about that in a minute as to how that occurs. But I'm going to go ahead and add a new one, $100 and submit. There we go. So this time I've got a director assigned. This is what it would normally look like when it doesn't freak out and go to the admin. So it's just another example. And now quickly, same thing here. I'll show it in the other order and then we'll move on. So I'm going to get Ellen real quickly. And approve. So you can see how this is in parallel. I can go, either path can go at any time. When they're on the clock, when they have the clock icon, they're up next. Let's go now to Brad. I know I'm moving quickly here, but we're already 40 minutes in. Now I'm gonna hit approve, and now we see things have changed now. So the stage is now hit an approved status, and stage 2 is now pending. So now Barbara's on the clock. These people down here are now locked in because it now made the determination. And the top part is approved. The workflow status itself for the whole transaction is still in approval. Now, something to note, any denial in the system denies the entire transaction unless you're in line mode. But if you're in header mode, it denies the entire transaction. It doesn't matter where that occurred. So it doesn't just deny the stage and kick it back or anything like that. It kills the entire transaction when someone does a denial, no matter where they do it from. So even if everyone else in the world is approved, if one person says no, it shuts it down. And then you have a couple options that you can turn on, and some of the delivered functionality has this turned on, where you can allow the requester to come in, make a change, and resubmit, which again starts the entire process over. Or you also have another option, which is pushback, which comes up regularly. So people always talk about pushback. They're like, I want to push it back to the requester. Well, that's not what pushback means in workflow. When you talk about workflow pushback, pushback pushes it one step back. So if Barbara were to push it back right now, it would kick back to stage 1 and ask these people to reapprove. So in some case, the director say, well, I need you to look at this again, or are you sure? And they might do a pushback. But always important to keep in mind, pushback goes back one approver, denial goes all the way back, kills the entire transaction. You kind of either have to enter a new one starting over or make a change and do a resubmit. So that's kind of basic, kind of how we set this up, kind of how we set the criteria, how we set the users. Let's go through user lists, because you'll see I'm populating this list and you're probably thinking, oh, where are we getting these lists of users? Where is it determining? How is it figuring out who the director is, who the supervisor is? So that's the last stage of approval here, and that is user list setup. So you have to come out here and create these user lists. Again, you're going to see lots of delivered ones out here, right? Your POs, your clerks, your, lots of ones out here that are used. I created custom ones for this. So let's say, how is it figuring out who the supervisors are? So there's 4 different ways we can set up user lists. They are role, SQL definition, query, and application class. And again, people always assume this requires a developer. It really doesn't for basic stuff like role. So if you have a PeopleSoft role, and you saw earlier I assigned a role to a user, if they have a role in PeopleSoft and you just want to key off that, and those are your people for certain approvers, that's really easy to do. From a functional perspective, you can also use a query. You can go to PeopleSoft query and write a query that pulls back your list of users based on whatever criteria you can imagine and brings them into the user list. From a developer perspective, they can write a SQL in App Designer that pulls back that list based on whatever criteria they want, or they can use application class where they're using people code to determine and put that list together. But at the end of the day, a user list is just whichever method you want to pull a list of users together. And like I said, at the time of the submission, it runs that logic, figures out who those people are, and brings those people into the approval chain. So in this case, to keep it simple, I'm running off role. As a developer, if I'm building this, I'm going to use a SQL definition. But from a functional perspective, you'd probably want to use a query, because if you're not a developer level, you're not going to be out there writing SQL. Route control attributes. Never use this. Don't know what it does. Going to skip right over it. If you know what it does, email me and tell me, because I have no clue. I've never seen it used, and the people books information on it doesn't really give you much information.
Okay, Randy, before you move on, can you select the SQL definition or query? Because I know there's a couple more options that open up that I think are worth talking about, which is include users as input and transaction keys as input.
Yeah, so absolutely. So from a technical perspective, if you're, and is this for query 2, right? I believe it passed.
Query has it too, yep.
Yeah, so, you're typically, there's multiple ways. And again, I said criteria, but in certain situations, you need to know what the criteria, you need to know more information about the transaction to pull the criteria. So let's say your transaction is business unit based and you only want to pull managers that are assigned to that business unit. So you need to know first, you need to know what that transaction is first. So using transaction keys as input will do that. The keys of the transaction, which in our case is a request ID, but it could be your PO ID or whatever it is. it's going to pass that to that SQL definition or to that query as a bindable variable so that you can put that in your logic. So you can say, hey, what is the, then you can look up, what's the business unit on this transaction? Okay, now I can go use that, join out to find all my managers in that business unit. So again, with a simple role definition, you can't do this kind of stuff. You're really stuck here on complicated logic, but when you get into here, you can start to do that. Users as input, Charlie, that provides like the requester as input?
I think then I think you're passing back who the actual user is. I haven't used that as much as I've used transaction keys as input.
This is input for the query. So this has to, I believe this tells you who the requester of the transaction is primarily. That way you can key off that, if you say, well, if this request is coming from someone in this business unit, then I want to go pull those people. So that kind of thing, or coming from this user group, then I want to do something different. So that passes, I think, that user so that the query knows. And you can do that again with both SQL definition and query. And I think app class too. Yeah, these are on app class as well.
To make sure that they saw that, because I think that's an important distinguishment as you get into more complicated logic.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And that's something that people are always wondering, do I have to have static lists? You really don't. You can make them as dynamic as your developer can help you with using these tools. All right, so we've kind of come full circle. I've got about 15 minutes left. I want to get through monitor approvals, definitely. We'll go through monitor configuration real quick, then monitor approvals, and then we'll kind of talk about more customization options. I'm not getting to show as much as I was hoping to, but this is taking some time. All right, so last step to configure is monitor configuration. So approval monitor is your, again, as I said earlier, kind of your admin tool. It's not the same thing as the workflow admin, which is who that gets routed to. That person actually has to come into the transaction, hit approve or deny, and that kind of thing. This is for really your highest end admin who can really get in there and do things with workflow. And you can see all of the things here. The key is include in search. If you forget this button, it never shows up in the monitor. And again, you'll spend an hour figuring out why it's not in the list, but you always got to include in the search. You can do display only if you want your admins to just kind of have visibility of what's going on. And I'll show you this in a minute, what I mean by that. And then you have all these things. What are you allowing your admins to do? Can they approve? Can they deny? Can they do, like I said, a pushback, a resubmit, reassign? And then you get to these. These are nice. Your mass reassign, your mass approve, and your mass deny. Common question we get. What if this manager is queued up to do 80 approvals and we fire them tomorrow and they're no longer here? What do I do? Well, you want to do a mass reassign to a new manager, right? Or you want to just mass deny them all. So you can allow that here. So usually with an admin, you give an admin the power and you turn all these on, right? You give them everything, let them do anything they want to do, and you'll see that in a minute, how that kind of works out. There is some user role stuff here. So you can say only certain roles can do mass approve, mass deny. If you want to get a little tied up there in the monitor stuff, but mainly the configuration monitor up here is what you're going to use. So with that turned on for your process, and by delivered, they're all going to be on, you can go into monitor approvals, and this is the page your admin would use. So this is a really nice tool within workflow that most people don't even always know exists. I'm going to pull up the ZZ process because, again, our process starts with ZZ, and it's not showing. We did have that turned on, didn't we? Yep.
Is it because there's no role under the configure user monitor?
Yes.
Okay. Let's do portal admin. Allow those. See, I thought that was for the user monitor page, not the monitor approvals. I'm only getting a couple to show up. It must be the user level I'm at. Well, we'll look at one of them anyway. See if we have any purchase orders in the system. We do. Cool. Perfect. So we'll look at purchase orders since my custom one isn't configured right here. So lots of search criteria here. So your admins can search by all kinds of stuff. They want to see, this is the approver, this is the requester, when it was last modified, what the current status is, if they only want to look for ones that are approved, and they can search. And once you hit search, this populates down here. Up here is where you can do some administrative activity. on these. If you want to do reassign, approve, or deny, you can do that here on this page. This is typically, you kind of have to choose who you're going to be. So your admin here can pretend to be people in the chain, which is nice. So if one of your people is again terminated or something, and you want to show it that they moved it on, and you just want it to get forward, you know, you're like, I just want to prove it to the next step, they can come out here and do that. You can also do it inside each transaction. So I can go into a given transaction here, and now we're going to see down here, notice it generates this awesome thing for you down here. So it generates exactly what you would see on the page, but you don't have to go in the page. So the admin here, he might not have access to POs, but he has access to come here and see what the approval chain for this PO looks like, and then he can act on these people's behalf. So Kenneth Schumacher is pending here, and I can, I can go in here and choose to be. Let's see here. Now it's saying no approval found. It should be Kenneth Schumacher here. Wonder if this one's actually kicked off. It is. Normally in this box is where you would choose who you're going to be. Not sure why that one's not showing that. Should say Kenneth Schumacher. And again, that's the person who you're acting on their behalf. You're saying, I'm going to do an action for them, and then you would approve, deny, or restart the request on their behalf here. And it does, from an audit perspective, put that in the comments that an admin actually did that, by the way. It doesn't just make it look like Kenneth did it naturally. It does say, hey, no, an admin did this on their behalf. So, but you can come in here and again, approve, deny, restart, reassign them. So this will reassign all the pending, you know, approvals here. See if it gives me a list here or not. Yeah, it does. So if we want to try to do a reassign here, I'm going to take it off Kenneth and give it to Brown. Yeah, see, it wants me to assign approver, but it won't let me. There's nothing in the approver box. That's strange. Something with the delivered config that isn't there. See if any of these do. Nope. I not have the user list set up correctly. But this is the tool, you know, like I said, that your admin would really use for that kind of functionality. So let's jump back to the slides and see where I'm at here. So again, we talked about monitor approvals. Again, I just have a screenshot here kind of showing what that page looks like and what you can do out there, the mass reassign, mass denial, approval, denial, restart on behalf of someone else as the admin. We talked about notifications, strategy. We didn't look at templates yet. We can kind of quickly scan into those. So you saw when I did set up a notification tied to an event, I did get the ability to set up a notification configuration. These are actually not under enterprise components either. They are under people tools, workflow, notifications, and generic templates. So we were able to provide a template. This is a common one you get too from a functional perspective. They're like, we don't like how the email looks. Can it say this? This is where you come in and make that change. It's easy enough. I don't have any custom ones configured, but again, let's say we want to come out and we're doing expense report approvals, right? And an expense report has been approved, and this is the email that would go out. And so this is the text of the email, the subject of the email, and these variables get passed in. Now, to add variables or remove variables, you do have to get a developer involved because there is a SQL view behind the scenes there. So you can't just go out here and magically add these. It has to be put into a SQL view. But you know, your developer can help you with that, and you can basically word these emails however you want. That's a pretty common one we get where people don't want it, they don't like how it's worded, or they want to add a value to it, and you know, you can do that from this page. Once these are set up, they're pretty simple. You know, you just set these up, assign the templates to the events, and the emails go out as is. You know, it populates all these variables with whatever variable is in the SQL, and that's what you get. And there's some delivered ones you can use as well here. And then the bottom of these is always %1. %1 is always URL, and it always provides a URL back to the approval page. That's why I said you have to provide the menu and the component, because it has to know where to point you. We went over strategy offline, online. We went over the types, and we just talked about the variable views and the URLs and how you kind of need a developer to get extra. Sure. I'm going to go through this real quick here from the slide, since we're running low on control and how you turn that on. You do have to have, it is a variable you pass to a, and second you turn it on, all these little green pluses appear. So The green pluses are allowing you on the fly to add a new approver. So again, and that can only be done by the approver that's pending. If it's my action and I have the clock, I can click the green plus and add another approver out here. I can also add new paths. So I want to create a whole new parallel path with another approver. So if I say, well, I want this approver to be added on, but I don't want to add them after me or after this, I want to add another one, you can do that. And so out of the box, like I said, and when you click this green plus, you're going to get a list of users you can add there. And again, out of the box, you're going to get a list of every user in the system. But I mentioned that you can tweak that with a view. You can put an ad hoc view in there and make it a smaller list. You can also get into all this stuff. So the classes, the coding, you can put code in that makes decisions as to whether or not ad hoc is allowed. So you can go customize all the way to the level of saying, well, directors can add new people to the approval chain, but managers can't, things like that, or certain dollar values. So your developer can really go in there and code a lot in the ad hoc class to do all kinds of crazy logic about when and where and how and who can add and whether they can add a path or an approver. But that's pretty useful. We see that used a lot. And again, a lot of organizations have that kind of off by default, but want it turned on for certain stuff where they might want another level of approver, just kind of in an ad hoc basis. One more thing here, thread class. Again, we saw that and I skipped over it because I said it was coding related, and it is. The thread is kind of how this looks. We often get at questions, can I change how it looks? Well, not really. You can do a lot with customizing workflow, but you can't really change how it builds this thing. It kind of does it on the fly, all pretty. But the thread control does allow you to change this line. So if you don't want it to say request ID 5, if you wanted it to give you more information about the transaction, you can change that thread class and it'll pretty up there. There's also another description field. Some of the other description fields can be tweaked through the thread class with some customization. Again, you have to get a coder involved to do that. But it is possible to kind of tweak the look a little bit. Ad hoc user list, again, we talked about that. That's how you would set who you can choose with those green pluses. Timeouts and escalation. So we didn't really look at timeouts, but just when you set these approvals up, this is another common request is, hey, what if I don't care? What if they don't approve it in 3 days and I just want to move on? You can do that. You can actually set it up so that after a certain number of days, you can do one as a notify, which is basically a real escalation, right? You're going to notify somebody else. You're going to say, well, if this manager doesn't do this in a week, we're going to notify his manager. Like we're going to go up the chain to his boss, and then they can poke him and say, hey, go do the approval. You can notify anybody. You can also notify, again, any user list. So you can notify all the directors, all the managers, all the requester, whatever you want to do. You can also choose advanced, which just means, hey, after 5 days, just auto approve it for him. We're tired of waiting on him. He hasn't, denied it, so we're going to move it forward. You can cancel it all altogether if you want to get really aggressive and say, hey, if you don't act on this in a week, it's going to get canceled and has to be restarted. And you can do reassign. So you can say, well, if he's too busy and doesn't get to it, he's got a proxy, we're going to reassign to the proxy. You set those timeouts up inside the configuration in there. Don't want to run too long here, but I will show it really quickly here because I'm almost through what I want to talk about. So going back to enterprise components, approvals, where we were in here in the approval process setup. You guys can still hear me, right, Charlie?
Yes, I can still hear you. I saw you drop.
Yeah, I just dropped from
the dropped.
Okay. Well, we'll go back to the PowerPoint slide then. You can set those up right where we did the criteria, right next to it. There's a details. You click on the details and you can set your timeouts in there. It's real simple. Number of days, what action you want, and what users you want that action to go to using user lists, just like everything else. And then you have notification escalation manager. This one's important. Your notification and escalation manager is a batch process that has to run to get those timeouts to occur. They won't happen on their own. The NEM process does two things. It sends out offline notifications. We talked about the offline strategy. So those won't go out till you run this, and your timeouts won't occur until you run this. So you have to have to run that thing. Most time when you implement this kind of stuff, you put that on a batch scheduler and run it at least daily to make sure that your timeouts occur. Otherwise, when it goes 5 days and it's supposed to notify the manager, it won't do that because it doesn't know to check. You have to run this thing and it looks and says, hey, is anything over 5 days old? Okay, act on it. A couple of the quick buttons we've passed through: user approval, user auto approval. User auto approval holds the approver. So if I am in the approval chain 3 times, which can happen, right? If I come back at multiple levels, maybe I'm acting as a manager and a director, and I approve it as manager. By turning this on, it just means when I get to my turn as director, just auto approve it. I've already done it once. I don't need to do it again. Route to requester was another little checkbox we passed over there. This says that the requester, if they're in the chain, must manually approve it. And again, if you're requesting it and you're also one of the approvers, if you're a manager and you submit one and you're in the manager chain, there's kind of silly to make them approve it. They submitted it, they obviously want it. So usually you leave this off and let it auto approve. And then filter requester says just the opposite. If I requested this, I'm a manager and I'm in the manager list, filter me out. Don't allow me to be my own approver. So, all the other managers will be in the list, but the requester himself gets kicked out. So these are little things that most people always ask if the system can do, and it can. You just got to check those boxes and know what those things mean. We already talked about admin routing. I showed you how when it can't find somebody, like it didn't earlier for the director, it kicked it to the admin. Okay, well, we're right at the hour here. I won't go too deep into the advanced customization stuff. We talked about most of this. Basically, you can do almost anything with workflow with a developer writing code behind the scenes. There's all kinds of things you can code to do all kinds of custom logic. I usually shy clients away from it because it can get expensive from, you're bringing a developer, you're putting a lot of hours into some of these things, but the sky is kind of the limit if you're letting the developer get in there and do kind of these various things, putting code behind the events that occur, putting code behind the app packages, creating user lists, more complicated ways like we talked about, or doing dynamic pathing, which again just uses code to figure out the path. So, okay, sorry, I know that was a lot. We went kind of quickly through it. Again, if you guys need the recording of this, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to stick around here for a little bit too if there's any questions or anybody wants to get any additional information. But other than that, anything, Charlie, you want to add?
Yeah, there's one thing I'd like to call out. I know when you were working with updating the configuration of your existing, you added a new row. I believe there's limitations on what you can adjust once a transaction's gone against that workflow, correct? So if I built it and then I've made my configuration, but then I go, oh, I need to change certain things. Only certain areas of that workflow are available once transactions have occurred.
Yes, and we saw that when I went to do the edit when I tried to do correct history mode, it didn't allow me to do certain things. That's why I added a new effective date. Yep, you can avoid that by just doing new effective dates for all those instead of trying to go modify previous ones that you're right have already had action against them.
And then I would also call out, I know there's I think a review workflow within the approval process setup that is very useful when you're creating one to make sure that your config is going to work without having to run a transaction through, because then that locks some of your configuration in place.
Yes, at the top of that screen, there is the ability to not only clone another one, but there's 2 other buttons there. One is to preview what it would look like. So it shows you what it would look like on those screens. And then, there's another one that even goes more in depth and kind of puts it in a flow chart kind of feel for you. So you could see how the stages and paths interact without running transactions, correct?
In my experience as a functional person, I found both of those things kind of important and useful because they're kind of gotchas, especially I've configured it, I need to test it. And then I go to test it and I realize, oh, now I need to make a change and I can't change something. So I have to add another row on top. Not the end of the world, but if you can avoid that at your initial development, it's helpful.
Yeah, there are plenty of pitfalls. And like I said, I pointed out a few of them in there in workflow where you get one thing set up wrong and it takes you a couple hours to figure out why you can't get it to do what you want it to do.
Yep. For anyone else who has questions, please take yourself off mute. If you're trying to say something, we've got everyone muted. So just take yourself off mute if you have questions.